Dear friends, colleagues, and business leaders, hello and welcome. I'd like to thank everybody participating in today's webinar. Now more than ever, we must share the knowledge and tools needed to navigate the path ahead. This discussion comes at a critical time. As we gather here today, the world is facing a once-in-a-generation set of crises. Escalating conflicts, economic instability, food and energy shortages, and worsening climate change are eroding the last decade of development achievements. The risks to private and public sectors alike, including waves of unfolding debt crises and social unrest, are very real. All these challenges are interlinked, and they are piling up like cars in a chain reaction crash, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres warned earlier this year. Indeed, our recently launched UN Global Compact Accenture CEO Study reflects the gravity of these challenges. The vast majority of CEOs, 93%, reported 10 or more simultaneous challenges to their businesses. These CEOs point out that global issues that traditionally lie outside of the corporate sphere, such as climate change or socio-political conflicts, are threatening value, delivery, and impacting stakeholders. And as companies continue to be impacted by global shocks, business action on sustainability is not meeting the pace and the scale that the world needs. But dear friends, the good news is that many businesses are finding ways to increase sustainability while navigating this uncertain landscape. This is because CEOs increasingly recognize that they can build credibility and brand value by committing to responsible business practices and sustainability. Not only because it's the right thing to do, but also because it's just good business. 2/3 of the CEOs, 66%, that we surveyed say that their companies are engaging in long-term strategic partnerships to build resilience. More business leaders are reconfiguring their supply chains and reskilling their workforces. They are increasing efficiency and reducing waste through circular systems and the latest breakthroughs in technology. More and more CEOs are acknowledging that sustainability is at the core of business resilience. The public is increasingly looking to the private sector for leadership on the world's greatest challenges. In fact, according to the 2023 Edelman Trust Barometer, business is now viewed as the only global sector that is both ethical and competent. But the business community must do more to earn and maintain that public trust. Companies must commit to greater accountability, integrity, and transparency across their operations. They must commit to protect fundamental freedoms and respect the rule of law. As the world's largest corporate sustainability initiative, the UN Global Compact has more than 2 decades of supporting companies in translating their sustainability ambitions into concrete action and outcomes. Our 10 principles on human rights, labor, the environment, and anti-corruption provide a roadmap for companies to increase business competitiveness, all while advancing sustainability. Our conversation today will address these themes and provide insights into the complex challenges that business leaders are facing worldwide. We will hear from Professor John Katsos, whose research on evidence-based strategies for business resilience has been published in the Harvard Business Review. We will also hear from UN Global Compact signatories and others who are finding ways to persevere and even thrive in the face of changing and challenging environments. Before closing, I'd like to extend my heartfelt condolences to all those who lost loved ones and suffered injuries in the earthquake and subsequent aftershocks that have struck Turkey and Syria last month. I extend my deepest sympathies to everybody affected by this disaster. And I'd like to thank our UN Global Compact local networks and participating companies who have found many ways to show their support. Our thoughts and appreciation are all with you. And now I'll hand it over to the UN Global Compact's lead on transformational governance, my colleague Michelle Breslauer, to facilitate today's program. I wish you all a fruitful exchange of ideas, and I truly look forward to future collaboration. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We're so pleased to have everybody here today for our discussion. As was just mentioned, my name is Michelle Breslauer, and I lead our work at the United Nations Global Compact on transformational governance. And that really aims to address rising expectations and pressures for business leadership across social, economic, environmental, and political issues. And through a transformational governance approach, we are encouraging businesses to be accountable, ethical, inclusive, and transparent, both internally, but also externally by strengthening public institutions, laws, and systems. Now, this isn't easy in what we might call normal times, but now we see that CEOs are facing multiple crises and multiple pressures, including geopolitical disruption. And that brings me to today's conversation. So we've designed this session for more practical insights and stories and examples, and to maximize the opportunity to hear from your peers. So I'd love to introduce our panelists today. First, we have Mushai Kunyiha, who is the Group Chief Executive Officer of Zanaka Limited, a family-owned investment group that includes CKL Africa and employs over 200 people across East Africa. He has over 20 years experience in business at executive management levels in the manufacturing and distribution of agricultural inputs and the real estate industry, and serves on various company boards as a non-executive director. He's the immediate past chairman of Kenya Association and is a director of the Kenya Private Sector Alliance and the East African Business Council. He also serves as the first vice president of the COMESA Business Council. We'll also hear from Victoria Dubrovska, the co-founder of a leading Ukrainian ride-sharing services, Uklon. She is an expert in finance and legal, as well as ESG and corporate culture. Victoria manages and develops Uklon as a human-centered business based in the company's values and corporate social responsibility initiatives. She believes that gender balance is vital in modern business, and she's one of the female leaders in the Ukrainian tech industry. And she's used Uklon as an example for instituting a unique program for maintaining gender balance and stimulating women to join the technology business. Our panel also includes Bennett Freeman, principal of Bennett Freeman Associates and associate fellow at Chatham House. He's co-founded multi-stakeholder initiatives and coalitions focused on the extractives, technology, and apparel sectors. He works on research and policy projects related to business and human rights, civic space, and geopolitics. And he was the lead author of Shared Space Under Pressure, Business Support for Civic Freedoms and Human Rights Defenders. Previously, as a senior vice president for sustainability research and policy at Calvert Investments, he directed the firm's ESG analysis, shareholder advocacy, and public policy initiatives. He served as a Clinton presidential employee in 3 positions at the US State Department, including as Deputy Assistant Secretary for Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor. First, though, we're going to hear some findings from John Katsas, who was introduced. John is an associate professor of business law, business ethics, and social responsibility at the American University of Sharjah. He's also a research affiliate at Queen's University Belfast and a research fellow with the Global Federation of Competitiveness Councils. And he researches how businesses can act sustainably through crisis, publishing over 40 academic and practitioner articles on business response to crisis based on work with companies in Syria, Iraq, Sri Lanka, Cyprus, Lebanon, Ukraine, and Myanmar, among others. And we've asked John to start our discussion off today with some of his practical insights and strategies on the topic of resilient businesses. So we'll start with that presentation, move into a panel discussion, and then share some resources with everyone before the end of our webinar, promptly at 10 a.m. Eastern. John, over to you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Michelle, and thank you for joining us on today's webinar on navigating crises in a complex world. Thanks to the Global Compact for inviting me to present some of my work. A lot of this work is conducted with colleagues who are part of the UN Principles for Responsible Management Education, which is a UN initiative to raise the profile of sustainability, primarily in business schools. What I'll do in my pretty brief remarks here at the beginning is talk a bit about the research, some of which I've conducted, but some that others have conducted on the characteristics of modern crisis, and then the most important lessons that we found in speaking to over 1,000 C-suite executives impacted by crisis. So a core reason for the complexity of today's world is that we have these three phenomena: climate change, social inequality, and globalization, that are coming together at the same time. They're converging. This makes the consequences of crisis deeper and longer lasting than previous crises in recent history. So as a part of the research conducted by the Global Federation of Competitiveness Councils on driving innovation out of crisis, we tried to understand some of the characteristics of crisis. So one of the major characteristics of crisis is that they tend to be novel. They're new in some way. And what that means is that organizations are usually not directly prepared to deal with it. So the OECD in 2013 did an analysis and found that novel crises just don't have predefined plans. And so the concept of purpose of training for them, not just from a business standpoint, but for any kind of organization, is different than it would be for other types of responses. The second thing about crisis that we found is that it's systematic. It's systemic, my apologies. It's systemic, which means that it affects entire systems or structures that organizations depend on. So these tend to be societal structures. They could be financial, environmental, cultural, political, health-related. But the idea is that a crisis has significant impacts on economies and on individuals throughout the system. It's not just one organization or one person or one country. And so related to that is the idea that crises are transboundary. They generally don't limit themselves to national borders or to regional borders. Instead, they tend to spread out and be impactful in bigger areas. The final thing that we've seen with crises is that they have severe consequences, but those consequences are not just the immediate ones. They have the high potential for what are called cascading consequences. The idea is that an initial crisis can then cause further crises. And this makes it even more difficult for companies, especially, to deal with it, because not only are they systemic and transboundary, but they then can lurch on in unpredictable ways, causing future crises. So as we've seen after COVID-19, we can have a spiraling set of consequences that fall after that lead to future crises. Crises can, however, even though they threaten competitiveness, they can also pose opportunities for innovation, which is really what the Global Federation for Competitiveness Council initiative is looking at. All right, to find out how businesses deal with this, we wanted to ask business leaders themselves these questions, and this is to be the bulk of the remaining time that I have before I introduce some of the business leaders who can give their perspectives on this. So myself and some colleagues talked to about 1,000 C-suite executives over the past decade. You can see the list of countries where they were executives from. These were local and regional C-suite executives, so companies that were based in these countries, but then there were also regional and country managers for multinational companies that were located in these locations. What we try to do is combine business research, right? So traditional research in operations, strategy, finance, logistics, the sort of things that we teach at the MBA level or at the undergraduate level to students, but that also are part of a lot of executive training programs at companies. And combine that with research on crisis and conflict zones. So things like risk and volatility indices, conflict barometers, mapping out what past crises have looked like and past conflicts have looked like, and then try to map forward on what future crises and conflicts might look like as well. And what we found was pretty interesting, I think. So there's more or less three essential ways that companies end up thriving despite crisis, and they're not the things you would typically expect. First is community partnerships. So we found in most of our interviews with companies that had been successful in spite of crises, that they had community partnerships before the crisis started that enabled them to better respond to the crisis when it occurred. So one of the aspects of crisis that we just saw is that they're novel. They're very difficult to directly prepare for. And yet community partnerships can really help companies know and understand how to respond once the crisis does happen. So one of our interviewees, Zahi Houri, who's the CEO of NBC, which is the Coca-Cola distributor in Palestine, showed us that what he was able to do is engage directly with other leaders who are non-business owners, members of government, members of community groups, and go beyond just CSR initiatives, but really create community partnerships where business leaders become embedded leaders in their communities. So this goes beyond just looking as a business leader at everyone else as simply a stakeholder to your operations, but instead looking at yourself as a key part of societal relationships. This can have huge impacts all across the supply chain. So in interviews with multinational companies, we saw that the ones that were able to thrive and survive in spite of crisis did this throughout their supply chains in every community in which they operated. This can be really time-consuming and expensive, but they found that it helped them prepare better for the eventual crisis that occurred. We also found that going beyond government guidance was key. So not every government is effective and fast and ethical. So we found that companies that were able to go beyond basic government guidance, basic legal requirements, were the ones that were able to faster and more ethically respond to crisis. So we interviewed Meryl Fernando, who's the founder and CEO of Dilma Tea in Sri Lanka, and they were able to address multiple crises. First, the crises related to the Sri Lankan Civil War, and then the aftermath of the 2008 tsunami that so badly impacted Sri Lanka and neighboring countries. They were able to do so because they had prepared in ways that went beyond basic legal requirements. So they didn't do just what the government was telling them to do. They did what they thought was right. And what that meant was they had ended up unintentionally or intentionally better preparing for eventual crises. The final thing we found was probably the most counterintuitive, which is that companies that took principled political stands were also the ones that were better prepared for crisis. Now, what this means is figuring out what your values are, knowing your values ahead of time, and then when inevitable decisions have to be made about political issues, making sure that you take a side and take a side that's actually in line with your values. This can be really hard for companies that don't have a good sense of their internal values. And so it can cause real internal angst for the companies. We found, though, that a lot of companies have been able to do this really well. So Hamdi Olukaya, who's the CEO and founder of Chobani, has been very vocal on refugee issues, for instance, in part because he himself identifies as a refugee and employs within the company a large percentage of refugees. This has helped them address political issues in the United States related to immigration and refugee inclusion. And it's been very easy in some ways for them to know where they stand because they know what their values are. With that, what I'd like to do is go to lessons from the source. So move now to our pretty incredible panel of business leaders so that they can share their lessons on crisis. So I'm going to ask our panelists, if they can, to maybe start with each of them sharing a little bit about their company and their work, what business they're in, who their consumers are, and where do they operate. I'd like to go to Mushai first, and then to Victoria, and then to Bennett. Mushai?
Thanks a lot, John, and thanks for the sharing. My name is Mushai Kunyiha. I'm working in Nairobi, Kenya, and in the East African region. Mostly in the agricultural space. We sell some agricultural inputs, but also part of the leadership of the private sector in Kenya and regionally with the Kenya Association of Manufacturers and the Kenya Private Sector Association. Yeah, and that's me. Thanks, John.
Victoria, could I ask you to introduce yourself and your company?
Sure, John. Thank you very much. So I'm Victoria Dubrovska, and I'm co-founder of a leading Ukrainian ride-hailing service, Uklon. Also, I'm Ukrainian woman, mother, and tech entrepreneur. And in our company, I'm responsible for the finance and legal. Uklon is the leading Ukrainian ride-hailing service with millions of customers all over Ukraine, and it is a platform that connects riders and drivers together. our company has a big social responsibility, and we have a lot of initiatives for humanitarian aid, for support for children of war, animal aid, and a lot of different cultural, environmental, educational, and sport projects. But we'll speak today about the biggest crisis in our country that impacts our company as well. But I would like to say that this month our company will celebrate its 13th birthday, and 9 years out of 13 we heavily support our fight for freedom, human rights, and democratic values. Because as you might remember, the war began in 2014, and full-scale invasion began only on February 24 in 2022. So, and now our main focus is to help our Ukrainian armed forces and logistical support for volunteers.
Thank you so much, Victoria. Bennett?
Thank you, John. I'm Bennett Freeman. I'm with Chatham House as an associate fellow in London, and otherwise work out of Washington, D.C. and elsewhere around the U.S. and around the world. As my colleague and friend Michelle Breslauer noted, I've spent much of my time in the last few years working on business and civic space issues, including setting standards and practices for companies to support and protect, when necessary, human rights defenders at risk. I also work on several campaigns, Business for Ukraine, encouraging foreign companies to exit Russia, and I also am with the Cotton Campaign, ending forced labor in Central Asia. And finally, I do spend a little bit of time advising multinational corporations on labor and human rights issues around the world, with an emphasis on policy and strategy grounded in international standards, the 10 principles of the Global Compact, the UN guiding principles on business and human rights, and not least the Sustainable Development Goals, and especially SDG 16, peace, justice, and strong institutions. I really believe that a standards and principles-based approach to corporate conduct and practice is absolutely essential in this world of crisis that we're in.
So now that everyone has a sense of our panelists, we're really sort of blessed because we have businesses and advisors who have confronted multiple simultaneous crises before, but we've asked the panelists beforehand to focus their contribution around just one. And I'd like to start with Moshai and ask, picking one crisis that your company has faced, what specific challenges do you think that forced on your business, and how did you address them?
Yeah, I think like you said, the challenge here is picking a crisis, since it's a multi-crisis world with the polycrisis that we've had over the recent past. I would say one I'd like to highlight is one we did in the private sector in Kenya, which was, despite all those other issues that were happening globally, we also had an election. And elections in Africa and Kenya have not always been a piece of cake. They can be difficulties. And in this case, also a significant one where we have a transition. Our previous president could not run again. So that does create its own challenges. So together with the KEPSA, KEM, and other bodies, we created the Kenya Daima Initiative, which is bringing a multi-sectoral group of people together, include the NGOs, church leaders, church and religious leaders, the media, and together start standing. And I love your point about making a stand early enough about what is right, irrespective of what the politicians think. And that was basically to have a constitutional, peaceful, participatory, and issues-based election. And we did a lot of stuff around that, making sure that's what is done. Meeting the candidates, we managed to get the candidates to make pledges, to run peaceful campaigns, and also to challenge any issues around the elections constitutionally, which means going to court rather than going to the streets. We managed to get them to present manifestos, and also supported debates, so that the election is less tribal based or personality based, but a lot more issues based, because you then give them a platform and they have to present their issues. Thanks, John.
And so I wonder if I can ask a follow-up, Mushai.
Yeah.
How do you feel like your company was impacted internally by engaging so deeply externally? So did you see changes in operations? Did you see changes in strategy internally, in employee engagement?
Yes, I think it does. I think one of the things in this initiative is trying to get people to participate in elections. That's one. But because our employees are also Kenyans, they are also divided politically at different levels. So usually this can become quite a tense time, even within the business. But you then give them modes of engaging and having healthy debate with each other. And listening to other points of views around the political space, rather than just, going at it from a tribal perspective, so to speak. Yeah.
Victoria, I have a feeling I know which crisis you're going to pick, but I wonder if you could describe for us how your company's dealt with it and how it's tried to manage through it.
Yeah, John, as I've already mentioned, today I will speak about the war, as it's the biggest crisis our company has ever had. And just to compare with COVID-19, which we thought was the worst upheaval, but when the war happened, we understood that we weren't ready for that. And we weren't ready despite the numerous discussions, like the war to be or not to be, and escalating the situations in the mood of the society. And our feelings were fear, complete uncertainty about personal and about business operating, anxiety and concerns. And for me personally, there were additional challenges because it were difficult choices, setting priorities between personal and business matters. And I'll give you an example of what I mean. On the 24th of February, when the full-scale war began, I was at home with my kids and with my dog. And I would lie if I say I didn't panic when the bombs were exploding near my family house. I was scared. And I needed to think about how to evacuate my kids from the city, but I also thought about our employees, about our team. And I just thought that they were scared as well, and they mightn't have enough money to take care of themselves and their families. That's why I called our CFO and said, I have no idea what will happen later, but today we have to pay salaries to all our people. And it was the first step in the crisis, to take care of people who over the years took care of your business. And later we helped a lot to our team, especially to those who were in danger or under the occupation, just to get to safer places.
So I wonder if I can ask you a similar follow-up question. You've talked a little bit about this already. How do you feel like now, a year on, your business has changed since the first days of the full-scale invasion?
Of course, it's changed a lot. And you see, it's very sad to say, but a lot of Ukrainians get used to new normal. And it's sad to say that the war is a new normal for a lot of people. And of course, we as business, we remain to be resilient, strong. So we changed a lot.
So Bennett, I wonder if I can turn to you. So you've seen companies in such different circumstances, in such different types of crisis. And I know it might be hard to just pick one, but if you could pick one and talk through what the crisis meant for the business and how it was able to push forward.
I'm going to pick a unusual example, given that my work is entirely global and almost entirely outside the US. I'm going to pick an American example that's not very well known, but we all recall that there was uncertainty and turbulence before and after the US presidential election in 2020, culminating in, beginning really with the refusal of the then incumbent occupant of the Oval Office to commit to peaceful transfer of power, unprecedented in American political history, and culminating, of course, in the insurrection on January 6, 2021, the attempt to take over the US Capitol and subvert US American democracy. What's not well known is that corporate America and Wall Street, CEOs of many of the major companies, came together under the auspices of the three largest US business and industry groups, the Business Roundtable, the US Chamber of Commerce, and the National Association of Manufacturers. And about 10 days before the election, they made a strong joint statement calling for a peaceful transfer of power. Immediately following the results of the election, which took several days to be really counted, but on the Saturday following that Tuesday, the same business organizations called publicly for a responsible transition and repeated those statements through November and December and into January of early 2021. It was an unprecedented engagement, even intervention, I should say, of corporate America and Wall Street in American democracy, which on the face of it is extremely troubling. But what's fascinating and I think encouraging is that American business saw that it had an absolutely fundamental, even an existential stake in the legitimacy, vitality, and continuity of American democracy as the cornerstone not only of the country, but of the American economy and to a large extent of the global financial system. So this was an extraordinary response to a crisis, and many, if not most, of the CEOs who came together to take the action were Republicans and not Democrats, but they came together in a bipartisan or nonpartisan way to support American democracy in its time of crisis. Just an extraordinary example, I think, of business recognizing responsibility, taking responsibility in a crisis.
And that's maybe a great transition back to Mushai. It sounds like, Mushai, a lot of what businesses' role is when they're engaging with these communities, they're interacting in ways that are meaningful to the communities, but they're also impactful in the crisis. So in the Kenyan election context, how do you interact with people, whether they're your employees, whether they're your competitors, in ways that allow the business to survive, but that also are tied to your responsibilities to the broader society?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. And it starts with the fact that a lot of the businesses are Kenyan-based, and we're also citizens in a sense. So the business itself is a citizen of the country that it's operating in. We employ citizens as well who are participating in the country. And so this unitary view that we all have to live together, that we are going to succeed if we succeed together. Not, we can't have exclusion that some sectors will succeed and others will not. So you've got to have that, I'd say, the global compact vision of a sustainable development, sustainable growth, and success being sustainable when we all succeed together. So that perspective helps you say, what is the best way of us doing this? And some of these things have already been agreed politically, where you have constitutions that have been put together, there's some sort of order and way forward that everybody's agreed to. So it's all about us being faithful to those pre-agreed positions and the pre-agreed processes that we want to work on. And I think also it's that a lot of our staff and a lot of us, even as leaders, we spend a lot of our time in our businesses. This is home. This is our community. This is where our sense of belonging is most of the time. So we since our lives are so wrapped up in our business, that must also reflect our values. It can't be too discordant with the outside world that we live in.
So I wonder, one follow-up is, did you have any pushback? So was there any pushback that you received from trying to engage in this way? And if so, who was it coming from? Or was everyone on board with your company taking on this sort of role?
Yes, you get some pushback, but it's, let's say, short-lived, because what would happen, you'd attend, say, we'd have different political candidates present to us their manifesto and their view, and then it would be like, oh, you're supporting this candidate. But then the following week, we would have the next candidate come and present, and then the other side would tell us, okay, you're supporting these candidates and all the other. And occasionally on some issues, you'd find one political party or one wing has a different, or is pushing a very aggressive agenda, which we don't find quite constitutional. One of the big ones we had was like the political debates, whether they would be attended or not. And it was unfortunate, actually, in the end, one candidate did not attend the debate. And we had to be strong and say, that's not good. For democracy, it's better when everybody attends the debate and has their questions, irrespective of whether you respect your opponent or not. Thanks.
So I wonder, Victoria, if I could move to you a second, and just in the context of the larger scale Russian invasion of Ukraine, there was a unity among Ukrainian businesses in a lot of the response. Did you feel like the company had to respond in particular ways? If so, what were those ways? And then did you feel like those were different from how other companies might have responded?
To be honest, at that time, a lot of Ukrainian business united their like capabilities, facilities, everything, and they were working just for the protecting of our territory. I just remember such cases when one very famous and very big Ukrainian fund, Come Back Alive, when they called to our CEO and asked to help them with the fuel. And it was a big challenge for us, because actually we knew a lot of fuel partners, and it wasn't a problem for us to call all of them. But the problem was that there was no gas cans. So there was no cans, and it was a problem. So we involved our employees and even drivers. Our employees, they started calling to different hardware stores, and our drivers, they went to those hardware stores and just bought those cans. And on the premises of this Come Back Alive fund, we organized some hub. So these fuel partners, they brought fuel in tanks, and we brought empty cans, and this fuel was used for territorial defense arms. And that's the example of how Ukrainian business was involved and how they united all their strengths and all their opportunities, possibilities, and everything.
It sounds like in those initial moments after the full-scale invasion that there was a coming together, and that a lot of the motivation seems to have come not just from you but also from your employees. In sort of the years since, do you feel like you've had to do things based on pressure from either your employees or from your community or from the government, or is it really just a matter of figuring out where you're best needed and then pursuing those avenues?
No pressure at all. And to be honest, when we took care about our employees, we just thought how we can help other people. So we were good in organizing transportation services, and we just thought that we can, we have a lot of like millions of customers who are riders and who got stuck in hotspots, and we have tens of thousand drivers connected to our platform, and some people who were in dangerous places, they needed to flee. Thus, we launched our new service, evacuation, that is named Evacuation. And to be honest, it was hardly automated, and for the first time it worked manually. But all our employees, all our drivers, they were very much involved in the process.
So Bennett, I wonder if I can shift to you. And you've seen companies in all sorts of settings, but you've also been on the government side as well. Are there times when you've seen companies have to go beyond what the government regulations are to really do what they think is right, but then more than that, where that ends up actually benefiting the company and being better prepared for crisis?
It's a great question, John, and it's one that really gets to the whole purpose of corporate responsibility and its relationship to government policy. And I think that we've come to recognize in the last couple of decades, as the corporate responsibility and sustainability agendas have become mainstream, and my area in particular, business and human rights, has become more broadly understood and accepted, that there are critical roles for business as well as for government. And a lot of what we've seen in recent years is the willingness of individual companies and groups of companies operating in the same sector, facing some of the same issues, to come together to set standards and to make policy commitments and to improve and share practices. We've seen this through multi-stakeholder initiatives, for example, in the oil and mining industry around human rights safeguards in conflict zones through the voluntary principles on security and human rights. We've seen this in the tech sector with the Global Network Initiative that brings together telco and mobile communications companies and internet service providers with human rights activists and academic experts to enhance transparency and accountability around freedom of expression and the right to privacy online. So we see these examples of corporate and initiative and multi-stakeholder standard setting initiatives in particular, but I really want to emphasize the notion that corporate responsibility, in my experience and frankly my opinion, is a complement, not a substitute for public policy, for government. Standards, regulation, legislation when necessary. And that doesn't mean, of course, that everything in the world should be regulated. But there has been a trend, especially in the business and human rights world, that I've spend much of my time in now, towards mandatory human rights due diligence, particularly now with a focus on conflict areas. And I think it's a positive development that we're seeing greater government responsibility to complement and reinforce corporate responsibility. Corporate responsibility is necessary, but not sufficient. It's about both together working with civil society. And that's one of the great things about the UN Global Compact, of bringing together through its local business networks of small and medium-sized enterprises, large multinationals, with civil society and governments around the world to set standards and to improve practice. That's what it's about.
I think that's a great description of how everyone can work very much together and not in lockstep, but how that everyone can coordinate around seeing where there's gaps and making sure that when business needs to lead, it can, and that when it needs government to step in or civil society to help, that everyone can work together and that everyone almost can shift leadership roles at various times depending on what the issues are. Mushai, I want to shift back to you. Kenya is one of those places where we really see the intersection of all three of these trends that I spoke about at the top. We really see the intersection of climate change impacts and with environmental issues and droughts. We see social inequalities. We see globalization all converging. And I wonder how you as a business leader try to address those in each crisis that you face, because all of them are impacting the crisis simultaneously.
Yeah, it is difficult. And like you mentioned, climate change especially is affecting us at the moment. We've got our worst drought in about 40 years, which is really catastrophic because although it's only 30% of GDP, 70% of the workforce is dependent on agriculture, and about 95% of agriculture is rain-fed. So we're going into about our 6th season of suboptimal rains. And so we've had some challenges with food and so on. I think the thing to swing to is also the personal impact on these kind of crises are having on individuals, and not just leaders. I guess leaders must really be feeling the stress. I really do feel for Victoria in terms of, it's a life and death stress that you're feeling. But similarly, our employees are going under very difficult circumstances. And what we found actually in the last year, that was in 22, especially the men, which was interesting. The men were really going through some serious mental health issues. We had in our business, 3, 4, 5 cases of people actually having pretty serious stress-related symptoms, and probably a bit more of them having, let's say, undisclosed symptoms, usually found in heavy drinking and that kind of thing. That's where you start seeing people are really struggling with this. And so we had to get in some interventions, which are pretty at a personal level. Business is not used to doing that, but actually getting the men, what we did in this case is we got a men's group where the men could sit and talk. In Africa, of course, which is still pretty patriarchal, and the culture is pretty patriarchal, and the men are expected to do certain things. So that pressure of expectation was huge on them as well. And then there's very little space for them to engage and share their issues, and be able to find somewhere to express yourself and maybe find some solace or solutions. So we created space for the men in the company to be able to have a conversation, hear that their issues are not unique to them, and also start to understand how their actions can improve or worsen the situation they're in, and what kind of steps they can take in those difficult circumstances. And we not only did a group counseling, we also opened it up so that people could have their own individual sessions and have conversations if need be, if they needed to get that counseling. Because at the end, we can't talk policy, global issues, but these things tend to be, at the end, very personal, individual issues that people have to go through. And it's important for their productivity and just their livelihood and their well-being.
So I think that what's fascinating about your description is these aren't things that they teach you in business school. There's not a pre-planned playbook for this. Instead, it seems like there's the human interaction that you're having allows you to understand your employees well enough to see that there's a need, while understanding the context within which it fits. Which is
absolutely. I mean, John, in the last 3 years, we've become epidemiologists, political historians, to kind of understand what was going on in Ukraine, supply chain experts. I mean, they're just things that we never thought we would need to know or understand. And you now have to kind of get to the root cause of it. I think I love what you said, that a lot of these things, because they are systemic, you really have to get to understand the root causes if you're going to try and respond to them in any meaningful way. So yeah, we have had to learn a lot. And I think, that old adage that, you've got to really, the future belongs to those who can learn and unlearn and relearn. That's really the situation at the moment. We've got to keep learning, keep understanding. I mean, recently we've been Kenyan businesses, we're looking at the weather forecast. We've started learning about the La Nina and the temperature of the Pacific. I mean, you have to watch these things so closely because they impact your life day to day. So part of the benefit of the information superhighway and so on, but also just the pressures of this poly crisis. You really need to know what is happening.
And I wonder if in that vein, we can move back to you, Victoria. When the initial invasion happened, it sounded like the company had to go and sort of an emergency footing. But now as it's gone on, I wonder if you can share what you've learned that you've now incorporated into the business for a longer term from those first few months.
Yeah, when the war began, we were paralyzed, and our goal was just to survive. But now, if you ask me what lessons I would learn, I would say that any business that has a human face, this business can overcome any crisis. And we put in the center our people, our employees, our customers, riders, drivers, and all other people. So, and that helped us to survive, because we launched 2 new services, and now we are on the verge of launching another one for wheelchair people. And we continue to develop our business, and we remain sustainable, resilient, and I would say that every business should be flexible, and it should not wait till the crisis pass and the life and business will return to normal. No normal. You should learn how to live in a new normal, in a crisis, and just to make some lessons from your previous expertise.
I think that's great. And I wonder if when you started your remarks, you spoke about how you initially thought COVID was the worst, right? It was sort of the worst crisis you could have faced. And then the full invasion occurs and it suddenly seemed very minor. And I wonder, was there still learning that took place between COVID and the invasion to help and adjust the transition, or were they really so separate and so different that there wasn't much learning that could take place?
Actually, COVID helped us a lot, because before COVID, we couldn't work in remote mode. But I remember when COVID began, we shifted to this remote mode in one day. And now, when the full-scale invasion began, we were ready to work in remote mode. And that's the main lesson that COVID taught us.
So we're at just about 7 minutes left. And I want one of the last questions to go to you, Bennett. Something you talked about that I think was really crucial is this idea of working together within the business community.
Yeah.
So not just the business working with government and civil society and operating as a societal actor, but then businesses working together. And I wonder if you were advising a company on why it will make them more resilient to crisis, what would you say?
Great question. Before trying to hit it on the head, I just want to say how encouraged and really inspired I've been just listening to Victoria and Mukai talking about really the first responsibility of business, which is to people, to your own employees, whether it's during an invasion of your country or during a drought or during COVID or through a fraught, uncertain election process. Putting people first and taking care of your own people in your own workplace and your own community, nothing is more important. And I just hope that we all, for all of the focus on the part of some of us, myself included, on policies and standards and practice, it comes down to what we do, how we treat each other. So I just really appreciate that so much. Look, companies, I think, can gain strength and confidence and resilience to the extent that they're willing to work together, and not just work together in the same community, the same region, the same country, but to work across industries, and to work together as part of this international community of ours, which is under it's in crisis. It's under threat, and I think that there's a responsibility of business to shore up at home and abroad the rule of law, accountable governance, civic freedoms, freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, freedom of association, to promote and protect human rights, labor rights, to promote democracy. These are all, I think, values and interests that should converge as both values and interests for business to work together, but with workers, with employees, with shareholders, with stakeholders. And the whole founding ethos and purpose of the UN Global Compact now for over 2 decades, since it was launched in 2000, has been to promote just that kind of corporate responsibility, shared responsibility, but together with civil society, with governments. And I know that, this all sounds very, standard, nice pieties, apple pies, we'd say in America, preaching to the choir. But so often we don't operate and work together and listen to each other and learn from each other in these ways. And in a time of crisis, some call polycrisis, there's a real responsibility and an opportunity for business to step up. And, I hear all the time, we all do, about the trust barometer, and there's more trust in business than every other society. I just would end by, going back to what Sandoz Jambo said in her opening remarks, that if business is going to maintain that degree of trust, it's got to earn it. And frankly, there's a heck of a lot more that companies can and should do. We're at the beginning, and we also need governments to step up. So it's about shared responsibility.
So I want to wrap up our panelist portion by just thanking the panelists for joining us and really showing what's possible, but also showing to a point that I think Bennett made quite nicely, that it's really about the human interactions. So we can talk about strategy, we can talk about operations, and I think especially Musha and Victoria really went into on the ground what that looks like in terms of engaging directly with employees, with customers, with developing new business models. When we talk at the Global Compact level, we're often talking at very high level leadership and strategic levels. But I think for each of these leaders, what we see is that crisis almost forces a conversation that's in the ground. And Musha, I think, had the great point that these are very individualized local issues, and they can be addressed broadly strategically, but they're still going to have to be done at the individual level, at the local level, with and in communities. With that, I'll turn it back over to Michelle. Thank you, everyone who's stuck around for the webinar. We still have lots of participants, but I'll turn it over to Michelle to wrap up.
Thank you so much, John, and thank you to our panelists. I found the discussion really insightful, and I want to, again, thank everybody for sharing these specific examples with us and kind of echoing what Bennett said. It's easy to talk about the high-level positive areas, but really hearing what is happening on the ground and how companies are responding at the leadership level and individual level is really important. So what we've done today is we wanted to share some additional resources with you, and we'll be putting these links in the chat. These resources on the slide are some of the UN Global Compact publications and otherwise that we've put out around these broader areas, including transformational governance and SDG 16, which I mentioned at the beginning. Feel free to send us a message to talk to your Global Compact local network. You can find those networks on our website, or to email us at governance@unglobalcompact.org. Again, we'll put these links into the chat for everyone to be able to access them directly. Once this webinar has concluded, we'll still keep this slide up after we say goodbye to our speakers so that you have a few more minutes to take down the information. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. We've had over 2,000 registrations, hundreds of people online, and we'll also be posting the recording of this conversation and the translated versions on YouTube and otherwise in the coming days. So we'll let you know about that. You should receive those links. Again, thank you for your time. Of course, these crises are ongoing. It's challenging to be in a prevention mode, to be resilient. It's challenging to be prepared. But I think if we can start to take out these commonalities across the experiences that we've heard today, if we can learn from the application and implementation of the standards and principles of the Global Compact and the international community, that will help us both in prevention, in building resilience, and in our response. So thanks again to everyone for joining. Thank you to John for sharing your work and for moderating, and to all of our panelists.